Hello guys, it's King What If here, and I'm back with another video. It's a new What If. Now this is a What If I actually did multiple times, but never posted. It started off with what if Belle was in My Hero Academia, and it didn't work, so I deleted it. And I was like, what if, what if Deku had Belle's powers? It still didn't work. And then I was like, what if Deku got his hat? What if Deku was in Damichi? I did try to do that, but it didn't work. So, this one I'm going to try. Now, something to note is, like, the first part of this video is actually scripted, and I did write a script. Now, if you like that, then tell me if I should keep writing scripts. Anyway, I plan on resuming my old what if, so the next what if I post will be what if Deku was Jirino was basically the Fire Force Reaper, the dude with the black smoke coming out of his hands who can make swords. That's gonna be part 3 of that's coming. Anyway, let's begin. In heaven, Goddess Hestia eats an apple. She spits it out and rolls over as she says, "Even eating is boring." The goddess gets up and goes on a walk. While walking, everything is bright. She turns to see another god. As she looks and sees 2 more, she thinks to herself, there are so much less gods in heaven. Hestia jumps up and says, "Alright, Oranos, I want to go to the lower world." Oranos replies, "Okay, Hestia. I'm busy, but I will guide you to the lower world. You'll have to wait a few hours for my prayers to be done," Uranus would say. Hestia would wait 2 hours before going to some gods, and how how to get to the lower world. Gaining information that there were wormholes that go straight to the lower world. A few minutes later, Uranus would use a gate to talk to Hestia. Uranus would say, "Unfortunately, some problems have come up. We're going to have to postpone your transfer to the lower world. There has been some problems in the dungeon. I will try to get back to you as soon as possible," Uranus would say. The gate closes. Goddess Hestia looks sad, and and she's tired of being bored. In heaven, everything is too perfect. She wants drama and impurities of the lower world, so she wasn't going to wait. She was going to go down there herself. 1 hour later, she walks towards the wormhole. There were 3 wormholes, and she didn't know which one to go through, but she assumed the first one would be the lower world. Hestia would turn around, and she'd say, "Goodbye, boring world. I'm going to go have some fun." Just as she says that, she jumps through the wormhole. Jumping through the wormhole as she is stilled with an experience. She sees many colors like rainbows. Meanwhile, in the world, a young boy is running late for class as he sees a villain fight. Azuku says, "That was an amazing fight. I got ideas and lots of notes." Azuku would run, but his eyes would catch the appearance of something bright. It was a beam of light. Was there another fight? Someone's quirk? Azuku would think of running, but he'd be running late to class, so he would just forget about it and go to class. Thinking it was a shooting star, as he would be running, Azuku would swear, "I wish I could become a hero and save people and fight villains." In the same time, the beam of light would land in a deserted area where Goddess Hestia would be on the ground. Her skin would be glowing as she remembered the rules of using her godly powers, aka Arcanum. She would conceal them, making her skin go into a normal shade. Hestia would say, "So this is the lower world. I do not think it. I did not think it would be this advanced. And where's the dungeon? Where are the different type of people?" Goddess Hestia would ask. She would start to walk. While walking, Goddess Hestia would encounter a man with the top half of his body resembling that of a wolf. She'd say, "Excuse me, wolf man," as the man would turn around, putting his phone turn around, gently asking, as he would gently ask, "Yes," as I, as I still, as she'd say, "Can you point me to the dungeon?" The man would look surprised as he asked, "What do you mean by dungeon?" God's history would say, "You know, the place where adventurers go inside and kill monsters." As the man would say, "Sorry, lady, that stuff's only in video games. Anyway, I'm kinda late, so I gotta go," he would say. "So, he doesn't know about the dungeon, huh? Am I not in Oranos? Even if I wasn't, people should still learn about the dungeon. Something fishy is going on here." And that is actually the end of the scripted version. I'm still gonna continue the what if, so don't leave. Now that was me writing a script. Now that part took me about 8 minutes to write, so I don't mind writing scripts. And if I should start writing more scripts, then tell me. But there will be something. If you guys want me to start writing scripts, I will have to stop doing the old what ifs. Now, the only ones I'll continue doing would be the what if Deku, and what if Deku had the only what if Deku had the Omnitrix, and like two or three more that I continue. But besides that, if you do want scripts, I'll have to redo some of my old what ifs. Anyway, let's continue. Improvise version. As Hestia would look around, could she have been in the wrong world? God says, Hestia would turn on her arcanum, as she'd use her power of gate, going to where Oranos' head chamber is. Oranos would say, "Hestia, I told you I'm busy. Please wait." As Hestia would say, "I'm in the lower world, but I don't see the dungeon or anything. Could you help me?" As Oranos would say, "What do you mean you're in the lower world? Did you come down there alone?" As she'd say, "Yes, but I don't see the dungeon." Oranos would say, "Describe your surroundings." As Hestia would say, "I'm around some trees. I see multiple different looking people. Like I just met a wolf man. But he did have something that he put on his ear," as Hestia would say. Uranus would say, "A cell phone." Hestia, "You impatient goddess. You've gone to the wrong world. That is that is the abandoned lower world." As Hestia would be like, "The abandoned lower world?" As Uranus would say, "Yes, this is the world that the gods first created, but we abandoned it because it was heading down the dark path," Uranus would say. Hestia would say, "Oh, can you get me out of here?" As Uranus would say, "Unfortunately, no. The only way for a god to go back to heaven is if they are killed. But unfortunately, due to the abandonments of the god, that world has become its own deity, if that makes sense. So, simply just killing yourself or you dying wouldn't be enough to send you back to heaven or the lower world." You might have to stay there for a few hundred years. He'd say, until we can figure this out. As God Hestia would say, no, please, no. As Uranus would say, I'll do my best. If being optimist, if I work as hard as I possibly can, I might have you out within 100 years. As Hestia would say, I'm okay with that. Or as Uranus would say, now, I don't want you using your godly powers anyhow you like. So, I will allow you to use 25% of your godly powers. Uranus would say, try to use them for emergencies. Goddess Hestia would say, okay. As Goddess Hestia would fly up high to the sky, as she'd look around, seeing Japan. Mean, meanwhile, in school, meanwhile, a few hours later, Azuka Midori would be walking home. He'd walk under an underpass. He'd walk behind an underpass. I'm sorry. He would walk behind an underpass as he'd be caught by a villain. Due to some un due to some circumstances with All Might's help. No. Due to a delayed plane, All Might wasn't able to make it to Midoriya's location that day. The sludge villain would be running away from random pro heroes going to the sewers where he'd lose them. As Suzuka was going to die, he'd see a bright light resembling that of the one he saw earlier, but it would be in the form of a person. Please, please, child, put him down. Hestia would say, the sludge villain would say, who are you? Hestia would say, that's not important. You could kill him. Sister would say, stay out of this, girl, or you're next. Hestia would say, I warned you. As the goddess Hestia would go to Belle. Goddess Hestia would pull Belle off of the sludge villain. Sludge villain would say, how did you do that? How? The sludge villain would rush at Goddess Hestia before Goddess Hestia would bring up 4 pillars from the earth, trapping the sludge villain inside. Izuku would say, thank you for saving me. As he'd say, hey, from what I learned, there are quirks in this world. So why didn't you use your quirk? Izuku would be puzzled at the way she had asked the question, like she had never heard of a quirk, despite having one, or two. He wasn't sure what hers was, but it wasn't the right time to ask. Izuku would say, I'm actually quirkless. And she'd say, you're quirkless, huh? Zuko would say, how can I ever repay you? Sasasi would say, I'm just doing my godly duties, with Belle being more surprised. Belle would call the cops as he'd walk with Goddess Hestia, offering to buy her some food. Goddess Hestia would accept as they go to a buffet, as Goddess Hestia would eat a lot, also drinking. She'd love the taste of alcohol. Izuku While walking back, they'd hear some news. While walking back, they'd hear an explosion. Pew! I'm not even gonna try. But while walking back, they'd hear an explosion. Hearing the explosion, they'd go to the place. Goddess Hestia Belle would, Deku would ask what happened, as a random cop would say, "Get away from here, kid. A, a pro, a villain had escaped his custody. apparently has some sort of sludge quirk, he'd say. As they say, he caught a kid. Midori would look at the kid, seeing it was Bakugo. Everybody was froze up in fear, but Midori would run, going and trying to attack the kid. The sludge villain. Midori would manage to hit the sludge villain's eyes, letting Bakugo get a moment to breathe as he'd start to pull off the sludge villain. The sludge villain would go for an attack. As Goddess Hestia would move forward, as she'd say, "Don't even dare," she'd say. Goddess Hestia would use her bright light. Goddess Hestia would use her bright light to blind the sludge villain. Sorry, Goddess Hestia would use her bright light to blind the sludge villain. As then Goddess Hestia would use her telekinesis and crush. Goddess Hestia would use her powers to compress the sludge villain within a ball. Now it might be like, how is this 25%? Think about it. Goddess Hestia is a god, so 25% of her power is about. She basically has the same power. Basically, if you want to compare 25% of Goddess Hestia in this what if, I'm going to say compare her to All For One at his prime. Okay? And with a few extra quirks. Because remember, Goddess Hestia is a whole god. Okay? And she's actually one of the 12 original kings. She was actually one of the 12 original seats at the throne of Olympus. But she gave up her throne to Dionysus because he didn't have one. So, she's pretty powerful. Anyway, let's continue. Azuka would be walking home as as he'd be getting scolded. Goddess Hestia would have to escape some of the press, asking her who she was and what her quirk is. Goddess Hestia would remain outside as she'd followed Deku. After Bakugo had left, she'd showed up. As Belle would be like, "It's you. Thank you for saving me." As Belle, Goddess Hestia would be like, "Don't worry about it. Anyway, I saw what you did there. You you went up against that villain despite everybody else not believing in you. I believed in you, and I think you're a good candidate, especially if I'm going to spend the next 100 years here." Goddess Hestia would say. Bo would be like, "What?" Goddess Hestia would say, "I'd like for you to be my first familiar member," she'd say. As Bo would be like, "What?" Deku would be like, "What?" As Goddess Hestia would explain how she was a god, how gods had special abilities to grant their blessings and everything. Well, Deku would seem confused, but not entirely, think it possible, especially since there are quirks that can there are quirks that can change the weather. Bo would accept. Bo, Goddess Hestia would say that she didn't have a place to stay. So she needed a place to stay. Bella would take Goddess Hestia home to his house, where Inko would see. Inko would smile, as she'd say, "Midoriya, you brought a girlfriend home." "But how old is she?" Inko would say. "We're looking at Goddess Hestia. But how old is she?" Inko would say, as she'd be confused. First looking at Goddess Hestia's height, then her face, then her hairstyle, then her cleavage. It all didn't match up. She had the face of a 24-year-old woman, the body of a 10-year-old, the cleavage of a supermodel, and the hairstyle of an immature girl. She was so confused. Deku would make tea, as Goddess Hestia would explain everything. Goddess Hestia, as Inko would believe it, as Goddess Hestia would show Inko the proof. Now, this is a superhuman society, So Deku won't have Riala's phrase, but he will level up quicker since this is a superhuman society. Okay? Goddess Hestia. The next day, Bill and Goddess Hestia would go to Kona Beach where everything was dirty. Goddess Hestia would say, basically, it's like a video game. You earn XP by doing different things. Earning XP will further raise up your level. Will further raise up your stats. The more your stats are raised up, the more probability for skills, until you eventually even level up. Goddess Hestia would say. Bo would be like, Deku would be like, okay. For the for the 9 months, for the next for the next for the next 5 months, Deku would train his body moving trash. One day, uh, Deku would be Deku would actually end up being uh 40% done with the beach. As Deku would paint, he'd think to himself, there's no way he should even be able to do this. It would have took him longer. As God says, they would have said, I told you, Deku. Because she calls him Deku. She'd be like, I told you, Deku, when you get a status, you, once you get a status, you, you, you have different abilities and stats, remember? She'd say, as well be like, yeah. And Deku would be like, yeah. After that night, Deku would get his status updated. Getting his status updated as he had actually been progressing well. But Deku still didn't have enough. One day while going to school, One day while walking back from school, Deku would see a gang of of three thugs ganging up on a small boy at a playground as they would be kicking him. Deku would go as he told him to leave it alone. The, the three would say, what did you say? Deku would say, I said leave him alone. As one of the guys would start to smirk. This kid must be stupid or something, he'd say, as the guy would turn his hand into a. As the guy would turn. Sorry. This kid must be stupid or something, he'd say, as the guy would turn his hand into sand. Man, let's get him. The villains would rush at Deku as they'd start punching him and slamming him. Deku would be angry as he'd say, get off of me. He'd catch one of their feet as he'd swing them across the playground, hitting them on, throwing them back first at the swing set. They'd bounce up. How dare you? One of them would say, picking up as the sand hand guy would throw a punch at Midoriya. Midoriya would dodge, but sand would get in his eyes. Midoriya would think that was an amazing tactic. Even if he dodges, he still affects his opponent, as he'd feel a punch in his face. Ah, his nose. His nose might have been broken. He'd think, as the guys would start to beat him up. Deku would get up as he charged at one of them, slamming him into a bench. One of them would punch Deku in the back of the head. Deku would elbow him in the throat before kicking him again in the face. Ugh. He would have been bloodied. The other one would throw an attack as Deku would catch his fist, pushing him down to the floor before kneeing him. Deku would go back. Deku would go. Deku would go as he'd be one as he'd go back. Inko and Hestia would ask what happened, as Deku would reveal that he had gotten into a fight. And Hestia would say, well, okay, let's get you medicated, but let me check your status first, she'd say. As Hestia would prick her finger rubbing it on Deku's back as she checked his status. Her eyes would widen. Deku's status has greatly increased. All of that from fighting those three hooligans. Deku's Deku's attributes. Deku's strength was about 345 in the in D rank, 345 D rank, but had turned into a C rank 426. Deku's defense was a 156 F rank, but had turned into a 210 D rank. They turned to D rank. Deku's exterior had Deku's exterior had Deku's exterior, which was an F rank, had turned into a D rank, and Deku's magic was still a 0. This be like, as Inko would say, good Deku, these are amazing stats. And you unlocked a new skill, she'd say, as Deku would be surprised. A skill? As 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 Hestia would say, yes. The skill is called heal. You can heal over time when you take damage, he'd say. And I guess we don't need to patch you up, she'd say as she'd laugh. For the next months, Deku would train. Whenever somebody Deku would change a Deku would train, and he'd end up getting more in trouble at school. So, for whenever he would see somebody, instead of turning the opposite way, Deku would try to pick a fight with them. When someone would attack Deku, Deku would fight back, even harder, sometimes letting his opponents get up and letting them hit him. Deku would clean up the beach. Deku would start doing weights, parkour, and he'd get into boxing. Within the end of the 10 months, Deku was a little more built than after the 10 months of training he did with All Might. Deku had had Deku had gained Deku had gained another skill besides heal. It was analyze. Deku could look at something, concentrating enough, he could sort of like develop a strategy plan map thing. And you might be like, what does that mean? Basically, think about it like this: you're playing chess and you analyze the board. But if Deku's playing chess and he's analyzed the board, concentrating hard enough, his mind would sort of like turn into like a computer, and basically he'd see them. He would see. I don't know how to explain it, but it's like all of the pieces would be highlighted, and whatever Deku thinks would like show up on his mind, like he's writing in a notebook and stuff. So it's not like seeing the future or doing this. He could just super analyze, like, this queen does this, the king does this. If she moves here, this, you get it like that. An extra skill. And Deku's strength had turned from 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 C rank. Deku's strength was now at B rank. Deku's speed was now at C rank. Deku's exterior was now at C rank, and Deku's defense had actually now been at B rank due to him taking lots of punishment. And Deku's magic was still a 0. God says he had told Deku that he was ready to level up, but unfortunately he didn't have magic, and he needed to do something great. The 10 months would be up as Deku would take a shower. Deku would do push-ups. Deku would wake up three. Deku would go to bed super early the following day, waking up 3 hours before the entrance exam as Deku would work out tough for the first 2 hours. He'd eat a good breakfast. As he'd he'd be ready to go. Deku would have Goddess Hestia check his status, updating it to the stats I just named, before taking a shower and getting dressed. Alright, I'm off, Deku would say, as Hestia would be just sitting there. Okay, well, me and your mom, me and Inko are going to me and Inko are going to work. Inko, who used to be a previous orthopedic surgeon, had decided to go back to work to support more for Izuku and Hestia. And Hestia had decided to get a job. She didn't like free rolling, so she got a job at a local fast food joint called Poppers. They served many food, but they were mostly known for their potato croquettes. Only place in Japan, in the city that sold them. She became a manager. She basically the devil is a part timer, but with Goddess Hestia instead of Satan or Mao. Deku would walk to the UA entrance exam. As he thinks this the UA entrance exam, Balka would nudge him on the shoulder, telling him that he should stay off his way. But Dory would say, it doesn't matter. I'll just go, he'd think, as Midori would walk before tripping. He'd be caught floating. Izuku would start to freak out before he'd be positioned straight. Uraka would be there as she'd basically talk to Deku, and Deku wouldn't say anything. The following part would happen the same. Ida would still say the same thing, and everything would happen the same. Now, they'd be at the exam. Everything would happen the same, and Deku would want to go talk to Uraka. He had remembered what Goddess Hestia had told him. If she was to give her status to someone who had a quirk, their quirk would be enhanced. And she'd be saying, I wonder what would happen if a zero gravity quirk was enhanced. Bell would the exam would start. Midoriya would start to run. He'd be running close to speeds at Ida, but not quite yet. Ida would think the kid was fast. Maybe he did misjudge him a little. Azuku would run, seeing a robot. As Azuku would punch the robot, punching through. Azuku would punch again, completely destroying it. He would pick up a piece of the shard, picking it up, wondering why it was so light. A robot would go behind him, trying to attack, as Deku would try to stab the robot with using the light armor, as it would go straight through like butter. Azuku would say, this thing is kind of weak. Azuku would pick it up, making a makeshift sword. Azuku would run as he'd start to stab the robots through their red eyes. 8 minutes later, Azuku would have actually accumulated a wealth amount of 45 combat points. Of 45 combat points. Azuku would 45 combat points, sorry. Azuku would be painting, and Azuku would be painting. He'd pull out something from his pocket. It was an orange liquid, and it was a purple liquid inside of a small glass bottle. Zuko would drink it. He'd look at the bottles. He'd say, "These potions are amazing." As he'd have a flashback, Goddess Hestia would have told Inko and Midoriya everything about the other world. She would have also mentioned potions. Inko, being an amazing doctor, would manage to recreate them, and Izuku would manage to get them back to their former glory. Now, Uraka, unfortunately, that was the only potion he could bring. due to him not being allowed to take much stuff in. Oraka would be in trouble as a zero point robot would be approaching. Izuku would rush towards Uraraka, moving the robot and picking her up. The zero point robot would stop as the test would be over, and Izuku would end up amounting 45 combat points and 60 rescue points. 6 days later, Zuko would get a letter as Goddess Hestia and Inko would barge through the room. Zuko, you got a letter from UA. Zuko would turn around saying, what? As Zuko would say, as Inko would say, I was on my way to work and I noticed that the box was open and you got a letter. As Zuko would say thank you. Zuko would sit down feeling uneasy for a few minutes. Before God says she would walk in her room, she'd sit on his bed and she'd say, open it. You at least deserve to know. He'd open it, revealing All Might. All Might would explain everything, with him getting 105 points, reaching the amount of score. Congratulations, you're part of a Hero Academia, All Might would say. And that's where I'm going to leave this part off. Now, to clarify some things I didn't say, and I'll clarify that next round. I'll probably forget. But to clarify something, Izuku did change his quirk registration. His changed his quirk to Hestia Familia. No, no. Deku, I'm gonna say Deku changed his quirk to Arcanum level. The Arcanum leveling. Yes, his quirk is called Arcanum leveling. Basically, he can. There's a weird energy. There's an undescribable energy in his body. The more he does stuff, the more the energy grows and adapts, even giving him new skills and abilities that should be tested. Basically, that's what it reads. Now, I'll probably post the next part later because I actually have a headache. Now, usually I kind of record the second part immediately after I record the first part, unless it's super long. And this one's already kind of super long, but I really didn't mind recording another 20-minute part. But I kind of have a headache, so bye. And today's Mother's Day, so I guess Happy Mother's Day to nobody hearing. Okay, bye.